Hello, welcome to the Commonsensical Kurt Show. Today we're going to be talking about college loans and why most of the things people say most of the things people say attacking college loan forgiveness makes no sense. There's absolutely zero reason why we shouldn't do this in comparison to the other things that we just do and don't even talk about. So, first, let's get the simple question out of the way. The morality of whether or not we should cancel student loan debt, at least in some capacity. First thing is, if it doesn't materially affect your life, and in this stream I can guarantee you and show you how college loan forgiveness will not materially negatively affect your life, whether you have college loans or not, then the only reason that you wouldn't want somebody to get their college loans forgiven, or at least some of them, some of the amount of money they owe forgiven, is because for some reason you just don't think it's good to give people handouts, or you're salty against people who may be getting some help from the government when you feel that you're not going to get any help from the government. I don't agree with that statement. I think we should be weaponizing the ability of the government to spend money almost at will with very little repercussions to do many things that we don't already do. And I just don't understand how people made it into the mindset that the government is ineffective at doing things that just involve writing checks. That's the main thing the government does, is write checks. Like all the stuff that the government has their hand in, if they didn't have the ability to write checks, it wouldn't matter. Like writing checks is the main job of the government. The main job of the government is to pay for things. And they do that by just writing checks. They don't even have to have the money in a bank account, they just write it. So, we'll get into that a little bit later. The main thing that I want to talk about now is taxes. So, if you pay off, I forget what it is. Let's look it up real quick. So, student loan forgiveness cost. Forgiveness. Help if I could spell cost. So, let's see. Biden student. So, it says it will cost between $469 billion and $519 billion over 10 years. So, that's over 10 years, mind you. Now, in the realm of the federal government, that's a ridiculously tiny number compared to the amount of stuff that the government spends. The government spends close to or just over $800 billion a year on defense. So $519 billion on the top end over 10 years is nothing. That's a blip on the radar. It's not going to affect anything by itself. So, since the government can spend that kind of money and it not even show up as a mark on the ledger, essentially, it's not going to raise your taxes. Even if the government worked like a normal bank account where you have to have the money in the bank account to spend the money that you're spending, it wouldn't even blip the taxes that you already pay because it's at most $50 billion a year on a government budget that's like, I think the last time I checked it was like $1.5 trillion that the government's operating budget is. Like it's crazy. It's ridiculous how much money the government spends, and your taxes haven't. Like you don't even notice when this money comes up. They raise the defense budget every year, and you don't even notice it on your taxes. So to think that $519 billion over 10 years, basically $50 billion a year, is going to affect your tax burden is asinine. That's just not how the government works. So, now that we have taxes out of the way, that leads us nicely into how the government actually spends money. So, it's a little complicated, but it's not that bad. So, this is essentially the way the government works. government spending works. Okay, so say you have one guy, his name is Bob. Then you have another guy, and his name is Jerry. And Jerry and Bob have an economy of 2. There's $1 million, $1 million up for grabs. $1 million up for grabs. That's the pot that these two guys are sharing. Now, Bob, he makes hammers. Say Bob makes hammers. And Jerry, he sells goats. Okay, now, ignore everything else. Pretend Jerry needs hammers and Bob needs goats. Bob and Jerry will sell goats and hammers back and forth to each other. And each one of them, in theory, would end up with $500,000. So Bob would have $500,000, Jerry would have $500,000, and they would just trade the money back and forth. Jerry buying goats from Bob, Bob selling hammers to Jerry. Now, imagine you have a third guy come in, or woman, let's say woman, and her name is Margaret, because I was just talking about Margaret Thatcher the other day. And Margaret has potatoes that Margaret wants to sell to Bob and Jerry. Well, we have 2 ways of bringing Margaret into this relationship. We can let Margaret use a bit of the $1 million floating around, in which case each one of them ends up with $300,000, right? But the issue with this is, since the money supply, the $1 million, stayed the same, since the money supply stayed the same, each one of them has $300,000 now. But the amount of hammers that Bob is making and the amount of goats that Jerry has to sell and the amount of potatoes that Margaret is growing has not changed. The amount of product being sold with that $1 million has not changed. So what happens is there's a deflationary pressure for Bob's hammers and Jerry's goats to get cheaper per unit dollar, because Margaret now has potatoes to sell, and those potatoes are sucking up dollars. So now Bob and Jerry have less to spend, but they still need the same amount of hammers and goats. So the hammers and goats have to get cheaper because Bob and Jerry have less money to spend, because Margaret's over here selling potatoes that Bob and Jerry now need to make French fries, whatever the hell they're doing with it. So that's one way to do it. You can let the deflationary pressure, you can let the value of the money go up relative to the goods, so the goods end up costing less individual dollars. Or you can have a third party controlling the money supply. So if they're the ones printing the money, we'll call them the government. Freaking storms blowing in. Sorry if you can hear that. So we'll call them the government. Now the government is printing money. They're printing all kinds of bills into this equation. So what they do, pardon my drawing skills, what the government does is they know that Bob and Jerry have $500,000 and they're trading $500,000 worth of hammers and goats, respectively. And Margaret comes in, she's got $500,000 worth of potatoes at the rate that the money was worth when she showed up. If the government wants to keep the dollar amount of hammers and the dollar amount of potatoes stable, they can just print a whole nother $500,000. $500,000 into Margaret's bank account. So then Bob still has $500,000. Jerry still has $500,000. And now Margaret is bringing $500,000 into this economy of three. And that keeps the cost of everything stable. Hammers are still worth the same. Jerry's goats are still worth the same. But now Margaret has money to bring her potatoes in and sell them at market rate. And that keeps everything stable. This is the main job, the main goal of the government in the economy, is to keep the value of the dollar, the value of the money, as stable as possible, while also injecting money into the economy so that way when a new business starts or a new house is sold or a new loan is taken out to buy a Ferrari, make sure that the money supply is there. So that way, Bob and Jerry and Margaret and whoever else wants to get into this economy have the funds available at the rate that the dollar is. Because the most important thing in economics is stability. And people are much more comfortable with a stable dollar. They know they can go to the store and milk is going to cost $3, $5, $2, however cheap milk is in your country. They want that to be as stable as possible. It makes people feel safe. It makes people trust that they're going to buy something now and it's not going to be worth significantly less in the future, or it's not going to go up in the future. So they might as well make different decisions now than they would if they knew the price was going to be stable. So that is the government's job, is to print money into the economy and keep the money supply roughly even with the amount of economic growth going in the country. And the way the government does this is by printing money into bank accounts. Essentially, the bank wants a loan, wants to give you a loan for a house. They call up the government. They go, hey, we got a loan for a new house coming out. We need the money for it. And the government the Federal Reserve just goes into the bank's ledger. And a couple keystrokes on a computer, boom, there's the money. They just created it. They gave it to the bank. The bank bought your house with it. And the value of the economy and the relative amount of dollars versus worth that there is has remained steady. And this is primarily what the government does. Everything else is secondary to that function. Your defense, your building of roads, your funding of schools, your payments to the Affordable Care Act so people can have health insurance. Everything that the government does at the federal level. The state level is a different beast, but at the federal level, that's the reason why they do it. And the reason why you have government spending, where the government specifically spends money, is because the government can write that check to buy those tanks. And as long as the growth from the company that built those tanks matches the value of what the government gave that company to build those tanks, then the dollar remains stable. So your inflationary pressure comes from when the supply of money going into the economy greatly exceeds the amount of growth in the economy. So there's more dollars floating around. It would be, to go back to our other example, go back to our Microsoft Paint page here. Screw you people. Microsoft Paint gets the job done. When the money supply gets out of sync with the growth of the government, it would be like Margaret needs $500,000 to come into this economy between Bob and Jerry, and instead the government accidentally gives her $3 million. Well, it's like, well, you can only sell so many potatoes, goats, and hammers, so eventually it's going to cost more. Everything's going to balance back out because now there's more money floating around in the economy. So Bob will be like, hey, Margaret, I know you've got an extra $1 million floating around, so I'm going to charge you $10 per hammer instead of $8.50 because Margaret has the money. And then Margaret's going to be like, damn, I really need a hammer, though. So she's going to pay that money for it. And then Bob will end up with some extra money because he charged Margaret some extra. He's like, great. I got some more money. I can buy goats and have some left over from Jerry. Jerry's like, wait a minute. I know that you just upcharged Margaret because Margaret had a bunch of money. So yeah, I want to cut. My goats are now $200 a goat instead of $175 a goat. Give me some extra money. And then eventually everything evens back out as long as the government doesn't screw up again. And there's a new normal that's hit. But what the process of reaching that new normal has made the dollar less valuable. So now goats and hammers and potatoes and everything costs more. So that's the danger. The two dangers that there are. One is deflation. Deflation is when the dollar rises in value. You don't want the dollar to rise in value rapidly because lots of people that own assets will buy assets at a given price and then they'll devalue relative to the dollar. So, they'll take out a loan for $1 million to buy this piece of property, but because the $1 million that they took out is worth more when they go to sell it, the actual value of that property is now $750,000, but they still took out $1 million. So they lost money just from the raising price of the dollar. And then the opposite problem is true with inflation. With inflation, you buy an asset, and the asset gets more expensive or rises in value faster than the dollar does. So it ends up costing more in the future. So that's what we're all dealing with now. Eggs go up in price, gas goes up in price. The value of the unit of currency, in the United States case, the dollar, is losing relative to the assets that people are buying, and that will make things more expensive over time. So there's a balancing game here. Okay, so this brings us to what taxes are actually for, because lots of people think that the government has to collect your money to spend money, but this is not true. The government can print money. Like I said, they don't like have a giant bank account where when you buy a house, the government gives the bank some of the money that was sitting in a bank account. No, they just change the numbers in the computer. And that's because the government has the power to print money. That's what the entire reason the Federal Reserve exists. And so the taxes are a way of mitigating the inflation that would come from printing too much money. So the government doesn't know what the value of an economy is going to be. So they print money in preparation for what the economy will be. But you'll notice that taxes are done on a percentage rate. And they're done on a percentage rate of income of gross income minus losses. So your profit, the profit that you made financially, is the only thing that the government taxes. And the reason that that's the only thing the government taxes, and they do it on a percentage basis, is because that percentage rate in taxes will float based on the value of the economy in any given year. If the economy slows down, less money will be taxed by the government because people are making less money. If the economy gets hot and a bunch of people are making money, the government will tax more money because the economy is doing better. And this floating tax structure of income coming in from the government is not so the government can pay for anything. It's so if the government accidentally prints too much money into the economy, the way that they get that money out of the economy is by taxing people. Because if they wrote the check to get the money into the economy and then they take it back and just don't write more checks for that money, well, they took that money out of the economy. And now it's no longer in the pool of money, either diluting the value of the dollar or raising the value of the dollar. And everything roughly remains stable. That's why taxes do not pay for things. The only exception being some social safety net programs. Social Security and Medicare are physically written by Congress to be a bank account system. So you physically get money into Social Security from taxing people, and then that money gets paid out to people. The government doesn't have to operate this way. This is just the way they decided to make up Social Security, because the theory of how governments spend money hadn't really been invented yet back when Social Security was written. So But normal income taxes that the federal government collects from everybody all the time, those are only there. The only reason the government has to collect income taxes is because if they just printed money and didn't pull any from the economy, then inflation would run rampant and the value of the dollar would plummet because there's just more dollars in the economy. So that's the function of taxes. And this is also the reason why college loans, or college loan forgiveness on the order of $50 billion a year at most, won't increase your taxes. It's because that's money that people are just, they're not going to have to pay back. So that money that the government is just letting remain in the economy will then be spent in the economy. It'll go on to produce growth, and then the growth will balance out the increase of the money the increase of the money supply in the economy, which honestly, $10,000 for most people it's nothing. It's going to be gone in less than a year. It's not a long-lasting thing, but it materially benefits the people that need it right now. But it's such a small amount of money that your taxes will never go up. There's no reason to think that your taxes are going to go up. So, this brings us on to why the government would target this debt specifically. Hold on a second. I don't know how to drive this bus, apparently. Hold on. Okay, I need to get a second screen. Trying to do stuff on my phone. Every time I try, it doesn't work. Anyway, cross that bridge when we get there. So this brings us to why the government would want to get rid of this debt specifically. Why this debt? There's so much debt in the economy. I mean, it's a debtor's economy. Like the creation of debt is how the government gets money into the system anyway for the growth. So there has to be debt in the economy. So why this debt? Why student loans specifically? And the reason is because all the other types of debt that there are mostly is debt with an expected and required return on investment or required return on investment to the bank and the people taking out the loan. And it doesn't have to be raw dollars. If you buy a house, you may not make any actual financial gains off that house, but you have a stable place to live. That home is an asset that as you pay it off over time, it should retain most of its value. There'll be rough patches like in 2008, but mostly speaking, houses should retain their value or go up. It's been going up recently, but that's a whole other can of worms. And then the other one is buying assets by taking out loans, and those loans those loans are specifically meant to make money on the side. If you take out $100,000 to open a restaurant, you buy a $20,000 freezer and a $10,000 stove, and then you put a bunch of money into renovating and whatever else is required to open a restaurant. I do not have the specifics on that. Then you expect to make enough money to service that debt plus make some extra for yourself. And this is true for every single loan type that we have except for two. And I'm not including the payday loan schemes and all that stuff. All that stuff that doesn't count towards this. They don't work this way. But except for two kinds of debt. The first one is personal loans. Personal loans where you just take money from the bank. There's no collateral. There's no plan in place for how you're going to make your money back on it. It's just like, hey, give me some money. And that's why those loans tend to be very tiny, and that's why those loans have really high interest rates, because the banking institution that gives out the loan doesn't actually care if you default on that loan. They just want to make sure they're going to get their money. So the way they get their money is by charging you a higher interest rate. You pay the money that you owe them faster, and they make that money quicker. So that way, if you have a 5-year personal loan, all the interest that you would owe the bank and all the money that they lent you is paid back to them in like 3 of the 5 years. And so they can more reliably make the money, given the fact that sometimes there's no collateral, sometimes there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to pay for it. And anyway, that's how that works. The second one is student loans. The second type of loan, damn, it's raining hard. Anyway, the second type of loan that the governments, that the banks are giving out without an expectation of some kind of return on it is student loans. And they do this because you can't file for bankruptcy on your student loans. You can never get rid of them. They're there all the time. You can stop paying on them. They'll ruin your credit. And there's no way to get out from underneath that bubble other than work out some kind of payment plan. And oftentimes the cheap payment plans just mean you're paying on $30,000 in college loan for like 50 years. Like it's insane. And college is not the guarantee of high wages that it used to be. So a lot of these kids are going into fields that realistically should be able to make them some money, and they should be able to pay back the $30,000-$40,000 in college loans on average that most people take out for the guarantee of a better life. But that's not always the case, and it's getting worse over time. So a good example I like to use is architecture. Like architecture is a well-respected field. You can go and be an architect, and it's a field that most people would recognize as being a solid professional field. Nobody's going to be like, "What are you studying that for? Like, how are you going to make any money?" Like it's obvious and it's easy. An architect will always have money because there's always buildings being built. There's always homes being designed. There's always random pieces of public infrastructure or just art pieces or art on a building. Like sometimes that happens too. That needs design. Except it became a very common field for people to get into, to the point now where you can get a job now straight out of high school, just no skills at all. Just go to some trade. Go to some trade that doesn't require any experience. That's what I did. I got into steel slitting, and within 3 years of being in steel slitting, I was making the same amount of money as an architect fresh out of college with a 4-year degree and $40,000 in debt. And it's just not the guarantee of a better life that it used to be. And the bank knows this. They know that they're pushing you into a debt that you cannot get out of. And they know that you're going to have to pay on it at some point. They know that your debt is going to, you may default on that loan, you may default on your ability to pay, but they know that they're going to get your money because you can't wipe that debt away. And if you ruin your credit, not paying your college loans, and you want to get credit, the first thing you're going to have to do is start paying them college loans. Like maybe you can get a car, but you're not going to get a house with a good interest rate unless you get your credit in check. And you can't get your credit in check if you're not paying on those college loans that you have. So it just creates this cycle in people's lives that the only way to fix it is to pay their college loans. But paying their college loans puts a drag on the rest of their life. We're all feeling it right now. All the inflation that everybody's been dealing with in the economy is stretching everybody's wallet. Now imagine you have a college debt burden that equals like 2/3 of a mortgage. Like you're not going to then be able to take out a whole mortgage. So this debt is unique in that there's no way to get rid of it. There's no demand from any institutions for you to have a plan on how to pay it back, and there's no like instruction or help. Like these colleges are just getting kids to go to schools straight out of high school with no real path forward and no incentive on the school's part to get them a path forward. Like if you do graduate and you do get a job, great. Looks good for the school. They can be like, hey, we got a good graduation rate. People go on, they get a lot of good jobs and all that stuff, but it's not guaranteed for anybody. Like I know that most of the people that I went to school with they're not like killing it, even with a 4-year degree. And I only went for 2 years. I bailed because I wasn't going to make enough money. So that's why this debt specifically is important to get a handle on, and not small business loans or any of that stuff. Small business loans, you can get screwed in a small business loan, but generally the people who take out small business loans have a plan for return on investment. They have to because the bank won't give them a loan if they don't, and they can bankruptcy their way out from underneath that loan if everything falls apart. You can't do that with college loans. It just hangs around your neck. So wiping that debt burden clean is an important first step to making things right. So since we're talking about the bill, let's go look up what it actually is, because this is important for people in case they haven't seen it. So the bill in question, let's see. Actually, it's not a bill. I don't know what it is. Is it a... Biden's just doing it unilaterally, so is it would it be an executive order? Or is it just something? I don't actually know that one. Let's see if we can find it out, shall we? Okay, fact sheet from whitehouse.gov. That's probably not going to tell us how they're doing it. We'll bring it up anyway. Okay, so since 1980, skyrocketing costs, 45 million borrowers. Let's see. So, it says here, provide targeted debt relief to address the financial harms of the pandemic, fulfilling the president's campaign commitment. I don't know about that one. I seem to remember. I don't know about. Yeah, this is probably pretty close to what Biden promised. See how it goes, but whatever. Department of Education will provide $20,000 in debt cancellation to Pell Grant recipients with loans held by the Department of Education, up to $10,000 in debt cancellation to non-Pell Grant recipients. Borrowers are eligible for this relief if their individual income is less than $125,000 or $250,000 for married couples. Now, this is something that I disagree with slightly. I'm kind of on the fence about this one. The means testing of a lot of these bills, where they'll cap it if you make like $125,000 a year. Like technically, I guess if you're making $125,000 a year and you only took out $40,000 in loans, then your return on investment has probably happened. So there isn't really much of a need for student debt cancellation. But I understand that argument, and also it probably plays well with conservatives. I don't know. But for me, I tend to think that universal, just giving the benefit to everybody, regardless of income level, makes it a harder thing to rescind in the future. Similar to Social Security. Everybody pays into Social Security. So every single person in the country has a stake in that game. And that's the reason why it's super hard to screw with Social Security. Like, the backlash is aggressive every time they try to mess with that program. It's because everybody gets it, regardless of your income level. And I think that's probably worth the cost of just giving it to the rich people too. There's enough rich people out there, and let's be honest, rich people in this country tend to run things that, like, if you give them some skin in the game, it's more likely to be like an ingrained thing in the economy. I don't necessarily want to support rich people because they get plenty of support already. But if I have to give some debt relief, even though you're not really relieving anything for rich people, if I have to give some debt relief to rich people too, if it gets it for everybody else, I'm fine with it. If it makes it more likely that everybody else gets it, I'm also fine with that. I don't know if I like means testing. Maybe there's some things out there, some specific programs you can bring up where it's like, nah, rich people shouldn't get this. Like food stamps, probably the way it's structured now, rich people don't need it. Like you will buy your organic, oat milk or friggin' free range eggs or whatever that costs 3 times as much as everything else. Just pay for all that out of your own pocket. I say organic oat milk like I don't drink organic oat milk. Love that shit. Anyway, so getting back to this. No high-income individual or high-income household in the top 5% will benefit from this action. That's political speak. They're trying to get brownie points. It's true, but it wasn't. The reason it's worded that way is because they're trying to to make it seem like they're for the people, which, to be fair, this is pretty people forward here. And in my opinion, the $10,000 and the $20,000 off is going to change a lot of people's lives right now, but it's very quickly not going to matter too much because this doesn't take loans away from people who are currently taking out more loans. So kids who are fresh out of high school right now going into college are going to be paying the same amount of money for college as all the kids who currently have all this debt, and this does not help them. Sorry, the $10,000 and the $20,000 deduction on the current debt does not help them. This will not go into the future. This is a one-time thing. Hopefully they do it more in the future, but at the moment, this is all we get, this one time. So the important thing for the long term is this bit down here. So it says cut monthly payments in half for undergraduate loans. The Department of Education is proposing a new income-driven repayment plan that protects more low-income borrowers from making any payments and caps monthly payments for undergraduate loans at 5%. Half the rate that borrowers must pay now under most existing plans. This means the average annual student loan payment would be lowered by more than $1,000 for both current and future borrowers. So what this means is currently, if you have an income situation where paying the standard rate that you would have to pay per month on your student loans is too much for you to handle, then the government will back your payments down to a max of 10% of your income. So now that sounds great. Like, oh, cool, I only got to pay 10% of my income. But if you think about it on a monthly basis, lots of people are working jobs where they might make $500 a week. So if you do that by 4 weeks, that's $2,000. That's $200 a month. Like, that's the difference between having a good, reliable car and driving around some Honda shitbox with 200,000 miles that you're going to have to take to a shop, because most people nowadays never learn how to fix their own cars. And even if they wanted to learn how to fix their own cars, you got to buy like $2,000 in tools to do that shit effectively. Trust me, I know. The transmission for my car is on the floor in the shed right now. But anyway, 10% is a lot. Now, 5% cuts that in half. So now you're at $100 a month if you make $2,000. And a lot of people don't make $2,000. Like, it takes you got to hunt for a job and you got to put a little time in for a lot of people to make $2,000 a month. So say you make $2,000 a month, your payment gets capped at $100. And $100 is manageable. Like, you can handle that. Like, you could also handle $200, but an extra $100 a month, man, that's like, I mean, you could go get a more reliable vehicle, and that $100 would cover your insurance if your record's not that bad. You could put some money back. You could, I mean, the price of houses now would take forever, but in theory, you could save some money to buy a house. Take advantage of some first time home buyer programs. And none of that stuff is, potentially none of that stuff is possible if you're only making $2,000 a month. You got one kid, you got a girlfriend, or you're paying really expensive rent, because let's be honest, rent prices are going up. So cutting it to 5%, that's a big deal for a lot of people. That's an extra $100 a month in their pocket potentially, or more. I don't actually know what the specifics of when when your low income driven payment plan kicks in. It may be less, it may be more. I'm not sure. Luckily for me, Luckily for me, I didn't have to deal with the income-driven repayment plans, but I'm well aware of how lucky I was to not have to deal with that. So that's big news. And then fixing the broken public service loan forgiveness program. Basically, what was happening is there was a program where if you did like public work or nonprofit work, if you're a teacher, you're in the military, you were a public servant of some kind, you could do it for X amount of time and then get your college loans forgiven. Except the program that was handling that, the people involved, were wicked understaffed. The actual paperwork was asinine, and Trump made it way worse. I forget what it was, but it was like the first 2 years of Trump's presidency. Don't want to quote me on these numbers. I'm in the ballpark. I know that, but I'm not entirely sure. The first 2 years of Trump's presidency, there were like 10,000 applications of public servants who met all the requirements to get their loans forgiven, and Trump's administration did like 7. I mean, 7 out of thousands. That's nuts. That's crazy. And it's just because this program was it started under Obama, and it was crap from the beginning, and it just got crap worse. So if they're actually going to fix this, that's huge news. I mean, that right there is a huge benefit to public servants that do jobs that don't pay a whole lot, like teachers. A lot of teachers are severely underpaid in a lot of states, and if you're a teacher, you can get your loans forgiven through this. But I mean, a lot of them just didn't. A lot of them expected to, and it just didn't happen because the government was just dragging their feet on it. So if they actually fix that, that's going to be big too. Remove a hurdle for teachers and public servants to get to living off the meager pay that they get. And this whole bit right here, protect future students and taxpayers by reducing the cost of college and holding schools accountable when they hike up prices. The president championed the largest increase in Pell Grants in over a decade. The president will continue to double the maximum Pell Grant and make community college free. This right here is bullshit, frankly. Until you see some actual thunderstorm, now there's car horns going off. Sorry. Anyway, if you actually see some hard, like actual legislation come out on holding schools accountable for ballooning their prices out the ass, that's when you should get excited about this. All of this right here is just that's political bullshit. Until you see something concrete, this means nothing. And it's honestly, it's sad that they put it in here because the rest of this is actually good stuff. It's real stuff. And this right here this is crap. I mean, I guess I don't like seeing like hyper political stuff when actually real things happen. Not that this is particularly political, but they're touting their own not achievements. And then the rest of it is graphs for breakdown. So Pell Grant recipients from families with incomes $60,000 or less. Okay, so almost all of the Pell Grants went to people with $60,000 or less. So that means there's going to be a lot of people getting that $20,000 taken off their college loans. And $20,000 is no joke, man. That's 2/3 or half of the average of most people's debt. And then let's see, the rest of this is just who it's going to help to break down how. Oh, this is important here. It says advance racial equity. What they mean by that is how the largest group of people currently holding college debt above a reasonable limit, like a reasonable repayment limit, is black people, and the largest group of them is black women. And the reason for this is there's no backup because so many black people live in poverty in this country, and it's not their fault long term. It's just the unfortunate way the system has broken down over time, that there's just no safety net for these people. They have no family with any money. There's no backup. Lots of families don't even have space for their kids to come home. Like, that's something that I'm fortunate for. Like, my family doesn't have like a nest egg put away to help me out in case shit hits the fan. But they have a house, they have space. If I absolutely needed to, there's a place for me to go. I'm not going to end up on the street. A lot of people below a certain income level, and which, if we're being honest, in the United States, it's mostly black people, there just isn't that safety net there. So they struggle with basic stuff that they shouldn't have to struggle with. And the college loans just make that cliff that they can fall off of. It makes it a little closer, and it's unfortunate that that happens to poor and impoverished people and mostly black people in the country. It's a very sad fact that gets overshadowed a lot of the time. Okay, so moving on. I think we're done with this. So let's see what's next. Okay, so let's talk about the future. So the future is going to look very similar to where we're at right now, with a lot of people in a lot of debt. And this $10,000, $20,000 forgiveness that they're doing right now, if we're being honest with ourselves, it's not really going to help. Temporarily, there will be a massive reduction in the college debt burden that people have, but it's just going to. College is still expensive. People are still going to college at ridiculously high numbers and going into fields that traditionally would make them money, but because so many people have gone into those fields, they just don't make money anymore. And or at least not enough to cover the cost of college. And that's not going to change because of this bill. There's still going to be lots of people coming out of the college system, starting this June, people graduating this winter if you had to go over a semester. And those people are going to graduate. They're going to graduate with the same amount of debt that everybody before them is graduating with. And this issue is going to just come right back, roaring right back. The best estimation I've seen so far is it'll take 5 years, and then the debt level spread across the country for college loans will be the same as it was before. So this is not a long-term solution. This is just a short-term sort of shot in the arm. It's good. Well, I'm not going to say it's not good. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. But it's not the end. It's not how we fix the issue. So there's a couple of ways that we could go to fix this issue in the future. One of them is to price control colleges. Just be like, yo, you don't need a 14th tennis court. You don't need a 6 times larger rec center or saunas or stuff like that. Like knock that off. You don't need that. Like just charge less. Just what the hell, guys? This stuff you're putting in doesn't help people get an education. It's all nice. I'm not saying it's not nice, but it's not helpful. It's not the reason people are paying the money that you're paying. Honestly, if all I needed was some tennis courts and a rec center for my younger years, well, most cities, large urban areas, they have free tennis courts, and you can go to the rec center and get in a pool. In most large cities. I come from my city that I grew up in was weird. It had a ton of baseball fields, and that was about it. A couple of basketball courts, no pools. 600,000 people in the city, no pools. Don't ask me why. City I live in now, much better distribution of facilities to use for free. But regardless, you don't go to school for the rec center. You go to school for the school. You go for the education. That's what you're paying the money for. So we could price control schools and just don't build more housing. Unless you absolutely need the housing, stop building housing. Stop building it. Stop pushing people into going to housing. Stop putting up rec centers. Stop making super ridiculous art sculptures in the middle of school. I've seen that quite a lot, actually. And just price control them out of doing that. Make them lower the price. Another way is monopolize the funding for the schools. So don't let the schools operate like a business. Make them operate like a school. So they have to meet certain education targets. I'm not saying test every kid, because we all know that No Kid Left Behind that failed epically. But have requirements. You have to hit a certain graduation requirement. You have to meet a certain quality of class. You have to have a jobs placement program to get people jobs. You have to explain to people, kids coming out, that hey, you may want to be a philosophy major, but
the jobs for philosophy majors are few and far between. You're basically going to go from college to working for a college. That's not to say philosophy isn't important. Pretty much every big idea that we've ever had has come out of philosophy some way or another. But it's not particularly useful for any private company to have somebody sitting around trying to figure out what's the right way to spend that company's money. By right, I mean moral. What's the moral way to spend people's money? Is it moral for you to do stock buybacks? Company doesn't care. It makes them money. So that's their whole reason for existing. Why do we need a philosophy professor in here? So there's a lot of fields like that. And a lot of kids are not told how hard it is to make money at the field that they want to pursue. That should be required. There should be a limit on the size of the sports program, because some of these schools spend ungodly amounts of money on their sports program because of what? Clout. Like it makes their school famous. So that way more people will come to their school so they can get more students to charge them higher tuitions. They can get more money so they can build a bigger rec center. Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I'm not saying don't keep the sports programs. It's a sense of pride. You want people to have a sense of belonging, but you do not have to spend anywhere near the money some of these schools spend on their sports program. Like, you've got the director of the medical school making like $120,000 a year, and you're paying Ohio State is paying Urban Meyer like millions of dollars a year to be the head coach of the football team. Like, that's not even academic. Like, why is a school paying him millions of dollars for that? Like the fuck? So that's another way that you could do it. Just monopolize the funding of the schools. Just let the federal government do it, because, like we talked about earlier, the government can just write checks. So if a school decides that they need a new geology building because they're old, their geology building is 80 years old, they can apply for the grant from the government, and the government can be like, you know what? Yeah, there's not a lot of insulation in that building. It's a bit expensive to run, and we really want to tackle climate change. Here's a grant. And then that building gets built. That money goes to a contractor. The contractor pays construction workers. He rents equipment from some business, and that money that was printed by the government gets spread throughout the economy, and all is well. And another way is to leave the private payment for school structure in place, but go back to how it was pre-Nixon, or not Nixon, sorry, shoot, I'm blanking on his name now. Reagan. Can't believe I forgot that. Go back to how it was before Reagan, where you still had to pay tuition, but the schools, the higher education schools, were really heavily subsidized by the government, to the point where I heard an anecdote from a woman in her 60s. She went to school in the 70s before Reagan got into office, and her mom paid $700 a semester for her to go to like a state school, like Ohio State, like Florida State, Penn State, like these large schools. She went to one of those for $700 a semester. Like, that's nuts. 10 years ago, when I went to school at a local school, it was a university local to where I grew up. Not a bad school, like a good school, but still no Ivy League. It wasn't a private school. It was just a public school in the city that I grew up in. And it was like $5,000 a semester just for school. That didn't include room and board. That wasn't books. That wasn't food. None of that. I was covering all that stuff on the side. And it was like $5,000 a semester. I was like, at the time, I didn't have a concept of money. So I was like, guess this is what it costs. But now I'm like, dude, I couldn't even pay that now. And I don't make horrible money. And I still couldn't pay it now. So it's like, it's insane. And the reason why schools were so cheap back then is because the government took the place of all of the private money that was coming in, that comes into schools now. The government was like, you're not allowed to take private money if you want government money. If you want us to help fund your school, you can't take private donations. You can't spend your money on stuff that isn't related to academic achievement. Like, you have to do these things, and then we'll give you a bunch of money, and you will then use the money that we give you to make school affordable. And Reagan nixed all that, and as a result, schools now just lost all this fund. It was like poof, overnight, it's gone. And the schools had to then go to private money, and they had to figure out how to fund their whole operation on the private market. And when you're a private market institution, you do what all private market institutions do, and you go hunting for investment money. And the way colleges do investment money is by getting rich people to come to their school, send their kids to school, so then the rich people's kids becomes alumni of the school, and the alumni of the school then donate money for the rest of their lives to this school. They do partnerships with local businesses to put their names on the sign, like they just become a business. And then in the interest of being a business, they're like, we need to keep growing, and the only way to grow is to get more money, and the only way to get more money is to get more students, and the only way to get more students is to spend money on facilities to entice more students to come. So they have to raise the price of the students that are already there, so they have money to spend to have money to spend on facilities and to spend on programs to bring more students in. And then those students, because they all eat resources, then take more resources. And then if they want more students, they got to start the cycle all over again. And slowly but surely, the price per student creeps up and up and up and up and up. And you end up in the situation where we are now. It's grossly oversimplified. A lot of other things happen, lots of government missteps. But overall, that's the general gist. When you privatize things, especially things where the supply and demand doesn't particularly work the way that it does under normal circumstances, it's rife for price exploitation. So those are the three ways you can do it. You can heavily subsidize it, but still have people pay tuition. You can completely monopolize the funding of it and just give the power straight over to the government. Or you can just price control colleges. Just don't give them any government money. Just tell them, hey, you're not allowed to charge any more than this. Like, now, the U.S. that'll never happen in the U.S., but it is a way to do it. I'm not even sure it's a good way to do it, but other countries have price controls over lots of things. Most countries that have privatized healthcare, like the United States, implement some kind of price control for the insurance, and it's fine. A lot of those countries have better health outcomes than the United States does. So it's not inherently wrong to do price controls. It's just, is it really the best way to do it? It depends. Most things depend in economics. It's, where are you? Who are the people you're doing it for? What do they need? How much do they need? When do they need it? All that stuff will alter the way that you pay for things and what's the best way to incentivize things to be reasonably handled. So the question then becomes, where do we go from here? Because, like we said, this $10,000, $20,000 is not going to help beyond 5 years. We're going to be right back in the same boat where we were, potentially sooner. And the answer is we as a voting public have to treat this like a stepping stone. We have to treat it like, yes, Biden, yes, this is the right direction. Like, you have done something that will materially help a bunch of people that has basically no downsides. None. So keep doing that. Keep working that way. I mean, the Democrats have shown in the Inflation Reduction Act that they're willing to push industries in a direction that they want the industry to go. And that's what the whole Inflation Reduction Act is. They frame it as reducing inflation. They frame it as taxes. They frame it as having a bunch of stuff in it for climate change. And it's true. It will do all of those things to varying degrees. It's probably not going to help that much with inflation, but separate issue. What it mainly is, though, is it's legislatively setting up the conditions to push the industries of the United States towards renewables, towards things that will help the environment, towards things that we're going to need. And it also pushes those industries towards making them in the United States. So the Democrats have shown a willingness to use the carrot and stick approach, mostly carrots in the Inflation Reduction Act, to be fair, which is good. Use the carrot and stick approach to incentivize the economy to move in a direction. And we should be applauding them for this, because that's the role, that's one of the things that the government does to help control inflation, to help control the value of money, is to incentivize growth in areas of the economy that are poised to see growth, that are poised to help improve the economy. And letting the college system suck more money out of people's pockets and just piss it away on more rec centers and more housing and more this and more that, is not generating a large return on the money that the government has printed them for these kids. There's a better way to do this. And the better way is to bring the cost of college down to what the cost of college reasonably is, and use the rest of that money to incentivize growth. I mean, solar panels have gotten like 100, like some dumbass amount, like 30 times cheaper in the last like 10 years, to the point where it actually costs less money now to, like, if you take a normal like natural gas power plant and just draw a box around it on a map, and you ask yourself, how much money would it take to build a brand new natural gas power plant on that much land, versus how much would it cost to fill that space with enough solar panels to match the output of the natural gas plant? And the answer is, it's cheaper to put frickin' solar panels on it. That was not the case 10 years ago. Solar panels are cheaper than building a new natural gas plant now. It's not to say that we can switch over to solar entirely, but my point is you incentive. There's no growth in natural gas. There's no growth in organic growth, where you put the pieces in place and things just kind of happen. There's none of that in fossil fuels anymore. They've run their course. They're just going to continue to be what they are now, and they're not going to have we're not going to find new sources of oil that somehow make oil or natural gas or any of that stuff so cheap that they will just decimate all the renewables. Like, it's just not going to happen. Renewable prices are on the drop, and fossil fuel prices, the cost of producing the facilities and the cost of mining them and the cost of refining it and the cost of burning it and all that stuff, the dollar amount, not the environmental cost, but the dollar amount has basically stayed steady. It hasn't gotten any cheaper because we basically engineered the piss out of that technology. There's almost nothing else we can do with it. So short of some miracle in engineering that somehow makes all that stuff ridiculously more efficient, renewables are going to win, like price-wise. It's just going to happen. So we should be incentivizing the areas where the growth is, and the growth is in renewables. And the growth is not going to be in colleges. Like, money-wise, colleges are too expensive now. They're pushing people out already. And if you want more educated people in the world, you have to create a situation where they're not being pushed out, where they're learning relevant skills, relevant things to make the United States a more competitive country. And just letting the colleges run rampant with this it's just not the right way to go. You got to get that stuff under control for the long term. But Biden canceling $10,000 to $20,000 now is going to change a ton of people's lives. Like, 45 million people are going to be able to take advantage of this. I'm one of them. I lucked out into being able to pay off my college loans during the pandemic. But So I'm not going to get the whole 10,000 back, but I'll get a chunk of it, but lots of people are going to get $10,000 just written right off their ledger. And that's a huge deal for a lot of people. But long term, it's not going to matter if we don't change some stuff. So, go out and vote, push the people around you to vote. If you want more things like this to happen, you got to work for it. We all have to work for it. There's no way around it. I vote every time voting comes up. I'm not going to lie. Sometimes I forget that it's coming up and I don't even know what's on the ballot, and I got to hurry up and Google it real quick. But, just staying connected to what's going on, understanding who's willing to make some changes and changes in the right direction, because going backwards is almost never the answer. I don't care what anybody tells you. It's almost never the answer. But you got to act like this stuff matters, because it matters. It does matter, and it's not a bad thing to give people who are in a toxic relationship with their loans a break. And everybody who has college loans is in a toxic relationship with their college loans. There's nobody who didn't get screwed in some way or another. Some people got screwed less than other people, but everybody's getting screwed. So this is a good move. We need to treat it like a good move, but we also need to treat it like it's not the end. And we need to push people to do it. And the Democrats seem like they're willing to do some of that stuff. But we'll see. Thanks for joining. This went much better than the last time that I tried to stream. I'm fully aware that doing this is a talent that I do not have out the gate, but I'm working on it. We'll figure it out. I'll figure out how to get Microsoft Paint and other programs to work without screwing up. Yeah, eventually I'll get a second monitor. Eventually hopefully I'll get some more people watching other than myself. I have one viewer because I got the stream running on my phone here, so I can make sure it's working because I only have one screen. But hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back on Wednesday. Hopefully the rain lets up, because, like I said earlier, I've got a transmission on the floor of my shed. I'd like to get that put back in before the end of the next couple of weeks. So, we'll see you on Wednesday. Figure out what we're going to talk about. Anybody has any suggestions? I'm going to upload this video onto YouTube at the Commonsensical Kurt channel. And if you want to throw a couple of suggestions for some topics to cover in the next one, feel free to throw it in there. This came out on Monday. What is today? I don't even know. Monday, August 29th. So if you watch this video after August 31st, don't worry about leaving suggestions, because I'll have already done the next one. So thanks. See you later.